Hello students, have you ever wondered how life would have been in the olden days of monarchy? Well, we are going to take a look into it through the lesson My Dearest Lizzie, which is an extract from the novel Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is one of the celebrated writers whose characters are witty, charming, and they also portray the customs of the day. She was born as the seventh of 8 children on 16th December 1775 at Hampshire, England. One of her best-known works, Pride and Prejudice, was originally written as First Impressions when Austen was only 21 to 22 years old, but it was rejected for publication. Later she rewrote it and published it in 1813 as Pride and Prejudice. Although Austen's works were received well by the general public and the critics, a thorough analysis and a separate study focusing on the literary nuances in Austen's works began only in 1939. Many critics of her time praised Austen for her incredible ability to isolate characters and bring out their individuality. She is also a witty writer who satirized the customs of the society. She also brought out the stark reality of the situations encountered by the characters. This leads us to the genre in which we can place the novel. One can safely say that it comes under the subgenre of the comedy of manners. Comedy of manners is defined as, I quote, a play, novel, or film that gives a satirical portrayal of behavior in a particular social group, unquote. And Pride and Prejudice fits into this category as it satirizes the social customs that were held higher than morality by the privileged classes. We can see that in the opening sentence of the novel. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. We might wonder what would be the reason behind the middle class and upper class's materialistic attitude towards life. We can say that Jane Austen simply reflected the mood of her era. We should keep in mind that this story was written and is probably set in the Regency period. Let us dive a bit into the history before discussing the plot. So, Regency period began in Britain when the Prince of Wales assumed the role of Prince Regent after his father, King George III, was declared unfit to rule in 1811 due to health issues. The practice of Regency rule, or it is best known as proxy rule, is when a person assumes the role of the king under the condition that the king is unfit to proceed with his official work. Prince Regent did not have much control over the government when he assumed office because most of the governing was automated through the British Parliament. So he did what all prince and princesses do. He indulged himself in material pleasures too much. He spent more money on throwing lavish parties, fashion and food. He was also a great patron of arts and literature. During his 9 years of regency, that is from 1811 to 1820, his name almost becomes synonymous with self-indulgence and luxury. After the death of his father in 1820, he became the King of England and was known as King George IV. What we need to keep in mind while reading the novel is the bizarre inheritance law in Regency era. According to the law, if you don't have a male heir to pass on your property, your immediate male member of the family can become the rightful heir to it. Your daughters cannot enjoy a share in the property unless the male heir wills it. This was the custom of the era, and it was not so simple, although it was a bit more complicated than this. So women were mostly at the mercy of men for their allowance. And the second most important issue of this is the economic benefits behind marriage. During Regency era, marriage was not just between two people and two minds, but heavy economic and political gains played their part as well. As I said earlier, most women were not left with property and enough allowance, and most lands were owned and taken care of the male members of the family. So marrying rich had become an absolute necessity for the survival of the upper class and the middle classes. So the major themes would be marriage, inheritance, class, love, reputation, family, social status, courtship, etc. in this novel. So what is this novel all about? A very short summary of it would be, I quote, Pride and Prejudice follow the turbulent relationship between Elizabeth Bennet, the daughter of a country gentleman, and Fitzwilliam Darcy, a rich aristocratic landowner. They must overcome their titular sins of pride and prejudice in order to fall in love and marry. Unquote. So I took this particular quote from a website called Britannica, and it almost sums up the entire novel. Let's take a look at the important characters and places. The Bennets and the Bingleys are discussed in the section given to you and also in the entire novel too. So most events happen in and around Hertfordshire, a real place in England. So the residence of Bennets is in Longbourn. The residence of the Bingleys is in Netherfield Park. Let's look at the members of the Bennet family. Father and the head of the family is Mr. Bennet, and mother is Mrs. Bennet. They have 5 daughters. Jane is the eldest. Elizabeth is the second child. Mary Bennet is the third child, and Catherine Bennet fourth. Lydia Bennet is the youngest daughter. Let's move on to the Bingleys family. We have Mr. Charles Bingley, who has a romantic interest on Jane Bennet, and we have Louisa Hurst, who is his sister. Caroline Bingley, who is also his sister. Mr. Hurst, his brother-in-law, and Fitzwilliam Darcy, Mr. Charles Bingley's best friend. So we'll discuss the story in detail in our next Zoom class, and also just keep in mind that you do a lot of reading about this Regency era and Regency period fiction, and also read a lot on Jane Austen and how she portrays her characters. And please keep in mind that you also have to watch the video that I've sent you earlier. Alright, so we'll discuss this particular novel, not entirely but briefly, in order to do justice to to the section that's given to you in our next Zoom class. Okay, so thank you so much for watching.